Good morning and Happy New Year, metalheads of the internet. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. This is our first album review of 2022, and I'm especially pumped because we also just so happen to be talking about one of my most anticipated albums to be released in 2022. That album in question being Epigone, the fourth studio album from American progressive metal crew Wilderun, their first released through Century Media Records, and their first album following 2019's critically acclaimed The Veil of Imagination. An album which many critics and metalheads and personalities hailed as not just being one of the best prog metal records of 2019 or even of the decade, but quite possibly a modern prog metal masterpiece. If I remember correctly, I personally gave Veil of Imagination a 4.5 out of 5 when it was re-released through Century Media Records in July of 2020. And I remember saying something to the effect of the foundation is there, that while this album may not be a masterpiece, I've no doubt in my mind that the next one could be. So the question for this review isn't whether or not Wilderun have made a fantastic record, because spoiler alert, they have. The real question we have to answer today is, have they made a masterpiece? I've no doubt that prog metal nerds and Wilderun's most diehard and loyal fanatics will claim exactly that, and I've also no doubt that, quite frankly, many of my peers here on YouTube within the metal community will immediately and prematurely claim this to be the best album released so far in 2022. But with all due respect, and despite Wilderun having expanded upon their sound in nearly every conceivable way on this record, I'm just gonna say it, I do not feel comfortable calling this a masterpiece. I also don't feel comfortable calling this one of the best albums of the year, but in my defense on that particular front, it's the first week of fucking January. However, that aside, I do think it's fair to say that this is Wilderun's most ambitious record, and that it is also their biggest and boldest in terms of sound and production. They are clearly spending that Century Media Records money very fucking wisely, because the sound on this is incredible. Lush, evocative, cinematic, magnificent, strings that swell and ooze with genuine heart and passion, guitars and drums that roar and crack like thunder. The songs themselves are composed, presented, and performed with the utmost honesty, confidence, and determination. There's very clearly a lot of hard work and soul that went into every single moment of this record. But as mystical and magical and majestic as everything is, there is a real sense of darkness throughout this record. This is a more introspective record in comparison to The Veil of Imagination, a more vulnerable record, and as a result of everything I've talked about, I'm reminded a lot of vintage Opeth throughout Epigone, namely records like Blackwater Park. I mean, sure, the album does admittedly open on a very tender and simplistic piece of acoustic guitar fluff via Exhaler, even going as far as to use some little guitar tricks to mimic the sound of young baby birds. But it does not take long after this number for things to get pretty weird, pretty wild, and pretty heavy pretty quickly. For instance, the following track, Wool Gatherer, is an absolute mammoth of a cut, clocking in at 14 minutes and 11 seconds and cram-packed with bold and declarative melodies, poetic lyrics, inspired, passionate guitar work, and some incredibly powerful, dare I say, hellish kind of blackened death metal, almost on par with what I would expect from, like, the Satanist or I Loved You at Your Darkest era behemoth. I mean, those gutturals and those pummeling tremolo riffs are just fucking monstrous, as are the very ominous operatic choirs surrounding and emboldening everything. For a moment, it feels as if the song itself is physically towering over you. In a similarly epic move, the album chooses to split its final track, Distraction, into 4 distinct pieces, which each of them tackling different subgenres and emotions. Distraction Part 1, for example, is noticeably quite somber and slow-paced, lumbering on these very moody hooks and riffs and arrangements before eventually blossoming into something somewhat more typical of the Wilderun formula. Whereas the finale, Distraction Nulla, goes straight for the jugular with a very intense, chaotic, ugly, bloodthirsty, primal blast of black metal ferocity and madness. Hands down the most extreme moment on the entire record, and perhaps the most extreme song that Wilderun have ever conceived and delivered. There's a part of me that wants to complain that because of Distraction Nulla, Epigon ends on a somewhat bizarre and jarring note, but at the same time, damn, this shit's heavy. Like, yeah, maybe not the most thematically or emotionally appropriate climax that one could have possibly given us, but damn, this shit's heavy. Even tracks like Passenger and Identifier are pretty damn fucking good. Maybe not as ambitious or as unpredictable as some of the other tracks and pieces that we've mentioned, but strong cuts nonetheless. Though there is one legitimate criticism I can levy towards these tracks and the album as a whole. It is, intentionally or not, extremely derivative of Opeth. I mean, there's just so much about this album that really does feel like it literally could have been ripped from a classic Opeth album. The guitar solos, the production, the lyrics, even the clean vocals are eerily reminiscent of Michael Ackerfeld at times. I mean, I guess it's not like a huge problem. It's still a really, really, really great and thoroughly exciting record. But it did get to the point where on my second playthrough, I did just kind of repeatedly say over and over again, wow, this sounds a lot like Opeth. I would even go as far as to say that right now, Wilderun are to Opeth what Greta Van Fleet are to Led Zeppelin. To their credit, Wilderun are bringing in enough of their own unique spices and flavors that, while derivative of Opeth, it never feels like a ripoff of Opeth. It never feels like a clone. It never feels like a carbon copy. Ultimately, I feel very comfortable giving this a very enthusiastic 4 out of 5, leaning towards a 4.5 out of 5. Warrants and all, it is still the biggest and boldest thing Wilderun have ever made, and I did thoroughly enjoy it from start to finish. There are some tracks I would personally have cut off, like Exhaler and Ambition, not because they're terrible, mostly because I just found them somewhat fatty and chewy and unnecessary, but hey, they provide a little breath of fresh air that some people may need going into this record, because, my god, some of these arrangements are fucking massive. No doubt in my mind, prog metal nerds and Wilderun fanboys are going to be absolutely elated with this thing. It is far too early to say that this is a best album of the year, so no matter how much you love this album, don't fucking say it. It's the first week of January, calm your fucking tits, but hey, it is a great album. I won't argue with you on that. 4 out of 5, a great album, super pumped to see how Wilderun continues to expand upon this sound and refine it and bring in more of their own unique spices and flavors. Definitely check this thing out. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.